All right, the Washington football team, their offense in 60 seconds. Hire Adam Peters as their GM. Use the second overall pick on Jaden Daniels. Hire Dan Quinn as a head coach. Their offensive staff, Cliff Kingsbury is the OC. Brian Johnson, formerly of the Eagles, the pass game coordinator. Anthony Lynn, who we know as the run game coordinator. Joe Witt comes over as the defensive coordinator from Dallas. Signed Dorrance Armstrong to a 3-year, $33 million deal. Frankie Louvu to a 3-year, $31 million deal. Tyler Biadasz to a 3-year, $30 million deal. Just hunting in the exact same territory for most of these guys. Nick Allegretti, 3 years, $16 million to play guard for this team. Also brought in Austin Eckler and Bobby Wagner on smaller deals with a little bit less guaranteed. Lost Curtis Samuel, Cam Curl, Kendall Fuller, Antonio Gibson, and Jacoby Brissett in free agency. Traded Sam Howell to the Seahawks. Their other draft picks, Mikey Sainer still in the second round, Johnny Newton in the second round, Ben Sinnott in the second round. Also added Brandon Coleman and Luke McCaffrey in the third round. This team had a shitload of picks this year.
They had a million picks, and they kind of did the Cowboy strategy of let's just get a bunch of old guys and hope that they can do something. Not as much of a reunion as Dallas, but definitely a bunch of older guys.
Blue chip check-in for the Washington football franchise. What do you got?
John Allen, I think. And other than that, it's very hard to find.
I think even that's generous.
It probably is. It might be in like the Derek Brown territory where it's like he's the best player, so I want to give it to him.
Derek, if we're going to put Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, Jordan Mailata, and all those guys down on the second line, we cannot give John Allen blue chip status here. He's a very nice player. I really like Jonathan Allen. That's not okay.
Listen, the punch you in the face, punch you in the mouth violence we get out of him, it kind of gets me into that territory. I want to give it to him. My heart wants to give it to him.
I think it's 0. And I think the guys on the second line are probably Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, and Terry McLaurin. And I think that's probably it.
I think for the second line, that's definitely it. I don't think anybody else fits into that.
All right. What significant question marks does this team have heading into the season?
Dude, like a lot of them. We came, okay, I'll start with the wide receiver core. We came in, everybody, fantasy people, film people, whatever, came into the season thinking Jahan Dotson, wide receiver 2, we don't have to worry about that. That doesn't seem to be the case at all. Like, I think we all thought we were going to get a nice little bounce back year for him, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And then I don't love a whole lot of the other options that aren't Jahan Dotson. So I don't know what they're doing other than Terry McLaurin. And then the offensive line, we'll talk about it in depth, so I don't really have to do it here, but not very good.
Yeah, a lot of concerns about the offensive line, a lot of concerns about wide receiver depth. I'm worried about outside corner. Like the idea that it's Michael Davis fighting for one of those spots with Emmanuel Forbes and Benjamin St-Juste is in the mix here. I think the spine of the defense, even if you have concerns about some of the age, at least they have answers at a lot of those spots. Like what's happening at outside corner and edge too? Like what are we doing there? We'll talk about the construction of this defense. It's very weird considering where Dan Quinn comes from, but I think there are definitely some holes at very important spots on that side of the ball.
Their edge room is so many good third rushers and nobody who is better than that.
Dorrance Armstrong and who else? Who would you throw into that category?
Don't they have Dante Fowler?
And Dante Fowler too. Yeah, it's all the Cowboys' old third edge rushers.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. They're perfect for that job. The problem is they are playing above that job now.
All right. What are you watching in the first month of the season with the Washington football team?
I'm mostly curious to see if Cliff can get this run game to work because last year they had to. I don't know if statistically it was the worst run game in the league. It was the worst run game in the league to me. Like it was just disgusting, and they had zero interest in even wanting to run the ball. I'm sorry,
there's ball 700 times last year.
Yeah, there's no reason that Sam Howell should be one of the top 2 or 3 guys throwing the ball in the league. Like that just shouldn't exist. And I almost felt bad at a certain point for Sam Howell having to be subjected to that. So I just want to see them do something in the ground game and commit to it a little bit more. And I will say, I think they're going to get there. Like, I think Cliff has shown when he was in Arizona, and obviously, Kyler and Jaden aren't 1-to-1, but I think they are similar in that they're just very fast and going to give them something on the edge. Cliff can make something work there, and I think he has shown that he will commit to the run game when it's something that works for them. And so if he can get them to just be, 15% better at it and actually commit to making it something where the quarterback is not in 3rd and 9 all the time, I think that is what I'm watching most. Like, can they get there by the end of September, October?
I'm wondering what the boxes they're going to get look like, Because in Arizona, it was usually favorable stuff, but they were playing in such light personnel, and they were using more two tight end stuff by the end of Cliff's time there, just because there were so many injuries. They started to experiment with stuff. But how many juicy run looks are you going to get if you're playing in 12 and 21 a little bit more often, and teams don't necessarily trust how you're going to throw the ball? I don't know what that looks like.
So I don't know either. I will say Jaden Daniels kind of has the Jalen Hurts element to him where you obviously have to think about the rushing threat with him and the quarterback run game option, all that stuff. But he also is a very good deep thrower. Like if there's
Mhm.
anything that I am confident Jaden Daniels is going to do very well early, it's throwing the ball down the field.
So here's my concern, though. Are
Who
they
is
going to
catching it?
let, not even that, are they going to let him do that?
It
Because
by
there,
indications of preseason, no.
yes, in the preseason, they have not let him do that. And I think with the state of this offensive line, they are hyper aware of protecting him at all costs. There's no way they could fix everything in year one. And so the offensive line is something that they kind of threw some resources at in free agency. But I mean, Brandon Coleman's going to get a real shot to be their starting left tackle on day one. And we'll talk about some of that in a second. But I think that trying to protect the quarterback at all costs in year one and not have him get the shit kicked out of him when you are clearly a rebuilding team, when this is a multi-year project, I wonder what that's going to look like.
I do too. I mean, that's a good point. I don't love if that's where you're at in terms of your play calling, it's never going to be good. Like if you are immediately handcuffed by like we're scared to do things, it's over
Yeah.
immediately. So I think at a certain point they have to just shed that.
I think that's probably the best answer, especially when you consider his skill set. But I just wonder, based on what we've seen in the preseason and based on some of the concerns, like how much they're willing to let that rip at this stage when his development and his progress becomes the most important thing. And I think keeping him upright is part of that. Mine is just what a Dan Quinn defense looks like without that collection of banshees that they used to have getting after the quarterback.
With
Like
nobody who runs faster than 4.7 at this point.
it is a slow defense, and at their best, it was a very fast defense over the last couple of years with the Cowboys. So, what does a Dan Quinn defense look like with this collection of pieces? This talent, this personnel on defense is almost the exact inverse of what they had in Dallas. They had all these edge guys in Dallas. Now it's all the three rushers here in Washington. Defensive tackle is the strength of this team when defensive tackle was the biggest weakness personnel wise on the Cowboys last year. Linebacker, I think, is a relative strength, just in the sense of like they have bodies there in a way they didn't for last year's Cowboys. And cornerback, where last year Deron Bland was a backup to start the season, outside corner, maybe the biggest question mark on the entire defensive depth chart for this team.
Like I'm trying to think maybe some of his Atlanta defenses were similarly built just because of Grady Jarrett, but it's not like any of those defenses were that good. You know, they would kind of bow up at the end of the season, but it's not like they were ever anything better than average.
So I wonder if that's the case, if things are going to be very different in the construction, is how you're going to deploy them different. But if you look at it, their coverage menu in the preseason is like exactly the same as what we saw in Dallas last year.
Yeah, listen, Dan Quinn is like better Gus Bradley. There's a little bit more to him, but Gus is going to run what he's going to run, and Quinn is going to run what he's going to run, and you kind of just have to. I mean, Jim Schwartz is actually the same way. He's like because he has the talent, is it's working, but there are just some guys, man. They're going to run what they're going to run, and there's not going to be a whole lot of change to it.
Okay. If you don't have the horses to do that,
I
what
don't
is
like
this
it.
going to look like?
Listen, I'm not saying I like it. I'm just saying this is the reality that we need to prepare ourselves for.
Talking to people there, I think the mindset behind the players that they added, Dorrance Armstrong, Frankie Louvu, Mikey St. Ristel, their priority was let's get the play style first, and then the schematics will come from there. We'll figure out what we do well. And maybe they take a left turn from some of the stuff that they've done in the preseason. But for the most part, what we've gotten in the preseason is what we got from Dan Quinn last year in Dallas and the last couple of years in Dallas. This team has been in dime on 38% of their preseason snaps.
Dan, we
So
can't be doing this.
I just don't know. Without the defensive talent, that defensive blueprint that we've seen over the last couple of years with the Cowboys, I think that there is a chance that that thing goes awry.
I think there's a good chance.
What is keeping you up at night for this year's Washington football team?
This offensive line I don't know if it's going to enter like Giants territory last year, but it's not going to be good. I've seen people say they've thrown resources at it, and I do think Tyler Biotish is a huge upgrade, and he should help the stability of the pocket, and especially when you bring in a rookie quarterback like Jaden Daniels, having a guy who's a vet, I think is good. I still think the guard play is a huge question. Like Nick Allegretti was not a starter. Like we have to remember that they paid him off as a free agent, but he wasn't a starter previously.
They've
Andrew
done that
Wiley,
twice. They did the same thing
yes,
with Andrew Wiley.
yes, exactly. Both Chiefs, by the way. And so that's a big question mark. Obviously, left tackle is a huge question mark. I long term don't hate the idea of Brandon Coleman, but like year one, I can't imagine it's going to look all that great. So I'm just a lot of questions about where this offensive line is going to be, especially with some of the questions that I have about Jaden Daniels specifically.
Yeah, I think what he did against pressure at LSU when he wasn't pressured very often because that offensive line was incredible, and his reaction to pressure where it was just mostly scrambling was one of my biggest questions about him coming in. And so you put him behind a much, 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 much worse set of players up front, and what does that look like? It's one of the biggest questions I think you can have about this team. The Brandon Coleman part of this, I get it, right? So when I was there, which again, it was like a week into training camp, one of my first questions to people there is like, are you going to think about trying to bring in somebody to play left tackle for you? A guy like Donovan Smith, a guy like a DJ Humphries that's on the street right now. And their answer, I think, is not wrong, where if it's close, we think it's going to be close between a guy we drafted in the third round and somebody we could bring in off the street, with where we are in our process, there is very little reason to not give that job to the third round pick and to see what he has, because otherwise you're stunting his development. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the Braxton Jones situation in Chicago a couple of years ago, where they actually did bring in Riley Reif and they thought that he would potentially be the left tackle. And they're sitting there like, why? Like, even if he's a slight step down from, even if Braxton's a slight step down from what Reif is right now, it is so much more important for our 2-3 year outlook to see if we can get starting caliber play out of a guy that we're going to be playing $600,000 a year. So I do think that is the mindset. Early on in camp, it seemed like he was pretty far away from that coming to fruition, but it does seem like he's made real ground to be the guy there. And he's a little dinged up right now, so we'll see what happens. But I get the argument for why you should play that out, considering where you are in your team building process.
I do think that is a good roadmap. And yeah, I kind of agree. If that's where you're at with your team building process, if they were a better team overall and thought that they could actually get competitive offense with a rookie quarterback, maybe I would want you to go sign a vet. But I think you're kind of spot on where if they're going to be, I mean, they hope they're going to be better than like a bottom 10 offense. But like if you're probably going to be that, probably fine to go give the rookie some reps and see if he can actually be something and see if you can get a starter for cheap.
My only problem with that is that you're potentially putting a rookie quarterback in peril, right? And like that's the issue here. And I think that you would have to be so cognizant of the ways that you're helping the left tackle consistently within this offense because of how important Jaden Daniels is. Is that going to be something where you're almost putting too much attention to it? And again, that's something that talking to people there, they're very cognizant of that. It's like, if we have him start, what are the ways that we can help him? So there's a push and a pull to all of this. Like, there are pluses and minuses, and we'll see what ultimately plays out. What are you most excited about with this year's Washington team?
2 of their 3 red chip players play on the interior, and one of the best players that they drafted also plays on the interior defensive line. So that's pretty much the only part of this offense that I'm really, really excited to watch. They've got some maulers up there. Obviously, we mentioned John Allen. He's just got those long arms, and he really is a guy who wants to punch you in the face as many times as he can. And that's just a defensive archetype that I love watching. Deron Payne is really good when he's really at his best, and then Newton, super explosive. Like when he really is on his game, I think he's a guy who has some pop to him. So I know he's not fully healthy. He's not coming into the season fully healthy. But if we can get anything from him, and then knowing what we're going to get from the other two, I'll always be excited to watch those guys, even if we don't exactly know what this defense is going to be.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the best interior groups in the league, especially if they can get something from Newton early on. I'm excited to see what Jaden Daniels really is in the NFL, because I think that some people come in the process painted him a certain way in terms of like what his skill set felt like, and talking to people at training camp just about his processing ability, they really do believe that it is advanced for someone who's a rookie coming into the league. And he did all of that kind of VR stuff when he was at LSU, and I do think that has, in their minds at least, given him a really advanced sense of like coverage rotations, like when guys are moving, what that means for him within the offense. So some of these guys who've come in as these more dual threat quarterbacks who have all this athleticism, like Anthony Richardson, a guy like Justin Fields. Like Anthony Richardson had 13 starts in college. Justin Fields was a young player coming into the league. There is a chance that Jaden Daniels just is more advanced when it comes to some of the work in the pocket than some of these other explosive runners have been coming into the league. And if that's the case, then I'm excited to see what he can be.
As a processor, I can buy that. Especially pre-snap. I think like a lot of what he was doing in terms of quick game and understanding when he was probably going to be hot or was probably going to need to get to a check down. I think he was actually really, really good at that with LSU. My two questions are going to be, how aggressive is he really going to be over the middle of the field? Because that was a question I always had at LSU. And then how well can he keep that process up when things start to get muddy in the pocket? And let me tell you, they will get muddy in the pocket this year. It's not going to be like playing at LSU. So that's the stuff I'm concerned about. But I do think for as good as he is when it is clean, I do think that there's some hope that he can maybe level up in a year or two where it's like, okay, he can do some of this stuff when it starts to get muddy and difficult.
So this is my biggest thing is, okay, some of the pre-snap coverage rotation stuff and even some of like the early in the down coverage rotation stuff, you can be a really good processor and have that part of your game be honed more than a rookie quarterback would be. That doesn't give you pocket feel. That doesn't give you a sense of how to navigate that space when things break down. That was my biggest issue with him when I watched him at LSU, is that he just wasn't making plays late in the down after navigating the pocket. He was taking off and scrambling pretty much every single time that he was pressured. And I think that there is a little bit more roboticism to his game than somebody with his talent level physically you would be led to believe. Like just same with Justin Fields, same with Jalen Hurts. Like there are elements to the way that he plays the position where there's a little bit less creativity than I want for somebody who's as physically talented as he is. And I wonder if he can overcome that in a way that those other guys haven't necessarily been able to at times. But again, that's a big question heading into it.
I think Hurts is like the right roadmap for him, like what you should be looking for in terms of like where he's going to be at as a player. Obviously, their rushing superpower is a little bit different, but otherwise, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the way they throw.
And I think the difference is potentially he is more advanced as a processor than Jalen Hurts is. That's the best case scenario. Can you get the strengths that you get from Jalen Hurts with better processing ability overall? And there's a chance that he gives them that, but with some of the concerns and some of the things that like crept up, I do think that there are some things that I still want to see when the games actually get going. Most important supporting character for this year's Washington team, who you got?
I had two, kind of like one on each side of the ball. On offense, I'm going to say Tyler Biotish. I mean, you can almost make the case he's higher than a supporting cast just because the rest of the unit is not that great. Like it's like Terry McLaurin is a known quantity, and then he might be the next best known quantity. So maybe he's not a supporting character. But I think when you have a rookie quarterback, you just need a center who kind of knows what's going on. And I think he's obviously going to bring that. So I think him playing well and helping Jaden Daniels out is going to be important. My other one is Jeremy Chin. I think he can kind of be the Jaron Curse-ish player for Dan Quinn in this defense. So he might be like their one guy or not their one guy because Luvu is kind of a crazy person, but their one guy in the back seven who gives them a little bit of an edge and gives them just this weird niche skill set that kind of unlocks some stuff for them.
And that's what they're hunting out, is these weird niche skill sets. Like the idea is that Shin can be somebody who plays in the box and plays safety the way that Curse did for them. Luvu can play on the line of scrimmage and off the ball in the way that some of those guys did in Dallas. And it's part of one of the things I'm worried about. I didn't mention it earlier, but there's a lot of like August ideas floating around this team. Where it's like, oh man, Austin Eckler's doing individual work at the receivers, and we're going to use him as our slot receiver, and we're going to use all these guys in all these different roles, and that all sounds great. And I just worry if there's a little bit like too many cooks and there are too many things being thrown out here.
What team did we say that about last year, and what team had a rookie quarterback last year? The Carolina Panthers. I think Terry McLaurin automatically makes them better than that. I will say that. But there's a lot of like, I feel like I've seen this movie a little bit before.
There's a chance they streamline it. There's a chance with Cliff not having head coaching responsibilities. We see him at a different level as a play caller and a play designer and just creating game plans and an overall structure for what this should look like. But I think that there are a lot of things that sound really good when you say them out loud, and then when you look at them in practice, they're never as good as you want them to be. And I think that's one concern I have with this team. My most important supporting character is Dorrance Armstrong. Like, he needs to be the number one edge rusher on this team.
You love Dorrance Armstrong.
I love Dorrance Armstrong, but to me, it's like, if he needs to be better than he's ever been in terms of like where he sits in the pecking order because of the way that this front is constructed and the way this defense is constructed.
He needs to have like the Shaq Barrett glow up almost, where he was like clearly a useful role player in Denver. And then he got to Tampa and it was like, wait, he's actually a Pro Bowl quality starter. Well, that's pretty neat. So that's probably his best case scenario there, is something like that.
What counts as a successful season for Washington?
Anything but what I just said with the Carolina Panthers. Like, anything but Jaden Daniels being completely wasted behind this offensive line and him showing some degree of like, no, he can hang as an NFL passer and pocket manager. That is a dub. Like, this team is not going to win games. So they just need to prove that their number 2 overall quarterback pick is going to be safe.
The quarterback is a keeper. And Dan Quinn shows us that he's able to instill like a certain tenacity and feel for what this team is overall. When we look at teams that have rebuilt over the last few years, the ones that we felt good about almost immediately, the Lions under Dan Campbell, like the sort of the good, warm, fuzzy feelings we have about the Cardinals right now, they played a certain way from the jump. So can this team feel like that by the end of the year in the same way that a couple of those other rebuilding teams have?
I think that's perfect. I will say that probably is their best case to not be the Panthers, is that Quinn can give them that energy. Because even if you like Frank Reich, and I'll admit I did, that was like the energy cell wasn't the thing for him. Like that wasn't ever.
That is not what Frank was bringing, especially at this stage of his career. And that is the number one selling point with Dan Quinn.
Exactly.
Your irresponsible player prediction for Washington.
I don't think a single player other than Terry McLaurin catches more than 500 yards. Now, this might sound like I'm hating, but I'm not hating. I think this is just like when you look at what typically happens with a rookie quarterback, I think you have to start there. Only 5 guys since 2004, which is kind of when they changed the passing rules, have gotten over 4,000 passing yards, which isn't even like a super high amount. But it's Andrew Luck, Justin Herbert, Cam Newton, CJ Stroud, Jameis Winston. I'm confident he's not going to be as good immediately as 4 of those guys. Jameis Winston, I might give him. But that's still not a lot of guys have done it. So you're already starting on a pretty low mark of having a lot of passing yards. Then you have to just account for, Cliff is probably going to run the ball a lot more than this team ran the ball last year. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. We also talked about it at the top of this segment. Who do they even have other than Terry McLaurin? If Jahan Dotson has somehow fallen out of favor, Luke McCaffrey was like a 3rd-round rookie who, might be a guy in a year or two, but I don't know if he's going to give them great play right away. They just don't have a lot of options. I don't think they have a ton at tight end. I think they lost one of their best pass-catching running backs. Like, I know Eckler will probably get a lot of targets, but I'm just not sure he's going to be as explosive as maybe he has been in years past. I just think that there's a world where Terry gets a majority of the yards, and then they just have like 9 dudes who have 300 yards.
I also think they're just going to run the ball a ton. I think as a way to like be functional on offense, but also as a way to insulate their rookie quarterback. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. I'm going with double-digit sacks for Frankie Louvu. He had 7 in a year 2 years ago. He had 104 pass rush snaps last year. I think he clears that comfortably on this team, mostly because I think they're going to need him to play on the edge based on the construction of this whole defense. Like, they don't have edge depth to keep him off the field. So I think he's going to be an edge rusher in a lot of pass rush situations. I think chin bops down, they play in dime, and then they have guys on the back end. You have Derek Forrest is still there. Percy Butler is still there. Quan Martin moved to safety. So I think they try to lean into some of those bodies they have at safety. They bump chin down into the box, and Louvu becomes more of like, if not a full-time rusher on 3rd down, then somebody who's seeing a lot more snaps on the edge on 3rd down, just based on what they need and where some of the holes on this roster exist. And I think when he's been given a chance to do that, he's pretty good at it, man. Like, he is a productive player when he's allowed to chase the quarterback. So I think that we could see him, stack up some box score numbers there in a way that he has not previously in his career.
I love that too, because it's a little different. I kind of did this with, I think, Trenton Simpson getting like 7 or 8 sacks or something like that. But that's such a different linebacker rushing the quarterback thing. Like, all that stuff is going to be from B gap or inside. Like, that's just how it's going to operate. This is like put him on the edge and let him actually pin his ears back. So I kind of love this.